Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is April 17th, Wednesday, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the transfer portal. A ton of names have already jumped in only less than 36 hours into this window, so I want to break down where we're at right now and kind of where we could be going over the next couple of days. Then I want to get to the story about Dion and the 6 teams he is quote-unquote allowing Travis Hunter and his 2 sons to be drafted by. Kind of want to break down that decision, my thoughts on it, and just break down everything I have thoughts on that about. And then Michigan accepted some punishments about the COVID-19 recruiting violations. Obviously, this is not necessarily the case that is going to catch the most people's eyes, but definitely some things to pull away from that. And we'll look forward to the big-time case of the sign stealing that will be going down here pretty soon. And then we'll finish it off with a Spotlight Wednesday, and today we were talking about the Kansas State Wildcats, so definitely stay tuned for that. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here, you can ask something that I hadn't brought up, or you can just leave a comment that I hadn't brought up. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a little bit of fun here, make this a little bit more of an interactive show for you all. But again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because the transfer portal has been open for less than 36 hours now, and there are plenty of names in there already, and it looks like it's only going to build. More and more big names have been starting to kind of file in, but let's break down kind of where we're at right now and where we could be going in the future. But let's start with the big board. So this is something that I absolutely will be updating throughout this process as more and more guys start to enter the portal and more big-time players or these guys commit, and I kind of break that down for you all as well. But at quarterback, let's start there and kind of make our way through the positions here. Quarterback is not necessarily the strongest group as of right now. As we talked about yesterday, quarterback is not going to be a position of a big need for a lot of these teams. It's going to be a lot of guys getting picked up as kind of backups or rotational guys. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of if there is a big-time quarterback out there to be had. I think there's plenty of talent out there to be had, but the talent tends to be younger players or it's older players who haven't played very much. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there, but right now you have Jacoby Criswell, who came from Arkansas. Sounds like Taven Green, the transfer from Boise State, is knocking down that quarterback job over there in Fayetteville. Then you have Ja'Cory Brown from Miami, a very talented kid that played a little bit in the Pinstripe Bowl, just never quite found the field, and especially with Cam Ward coming into town, had very little chance to be the starter for them this upcoming year. And then Nick Evers, a guy that started his career at Oklahoma, then went to Wisconsin, and was just kind of stuck behind a couple of really experienced quarterbacks. So all these guys are plenty talented kids, definitely have some ability to them, but I wouldn't necessarily say there's a Power 5 starting job out there for them. Now, Jacoby Criswell is the one that I'm watching probably the most closely because I think he probably has the highest upside of the group. But at the end of the day, I think more guys will definitely join, and maybe some things could get mixed up as we go on here. But for the time being, the quarterback group, while a solid group of names, not necessarily the big-time names that could be starters this upcoming year necessarily. But running back group is a very fun group, to be totally honest with you. This is the one we talked about yesterday. Chris Hummer said it's going to have the most big names, and it's living up to that right now. Damian Martinez is the biggest name on this list. He has plenty of people after him. He has locked in visits to Arizona, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Miami. It sounds like Miami is mainly the team to watch there, but Tennessee and Kentucky, I think, will not be very far behind here. Mississippi State has been a team that Chris Hummer tabbed to maybe surprise some people, so who knows what happens there, but that's the big guy there at that position, definitely the guy that kind of sets the pace for everyone else. But then you add guys like Henry Parrish from Miami, Andrew Paul from Georgia, and Dallin Hayden from Ohio State, along with Trevante Citizen from Miami. I think you have a ton of talent. Obviously, two of those guys coming from Miami shows you what Miami needs at that running back position. So Damian Martinez will definitely be getting plenty of calls from Mario Cristobal and company. But let's move on to wide receivers, and this is kind of an interesting group that I think will slowly get more and more interesting. I think this is likely the group that will have the most outright talent on it, to be totally honest with you, just because some guys get stuck behind really, really talented guys. You know, we saw it with Julian Fleming at Ohio State, made his way over to Penn State. And one of these guys on here is a Penn State guy. But let's start with Justice Ross Simmons from Colorado State. He is a big name to watch. He is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the portal right now. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith is not too far behind him. If not, you could definitely have him as the number one guy. But I think he has set up visits to a couple of different places. I know Georgia has reached out. I know a couple other big-time schools. I believe Auburn is one of the others that reached out. I'd be a little bit surprised if Georgia went fully after Keandre Lambert-Smith, but who knows? You never can have too many weapons around there, so it'll be interesting to see how that one develops. You also have Tyler Williams, who came from UGA, was a very talented kid coming out of high school, and then Raymond Cottrell, a guy that was at Texas A&M to start the offseason, transferred to Kentucky, and decided he was not very happy there, so is back in the transfer portal. So it'll be interesting to see what the market is for him. Obviously, you're a little bit wary of the kids that bounce around to that degree, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid that if you put him in the right situation, I'm sure could thrive very efficiently for sure. But then you look at tight end, and it's not a lot of guys. Eli Stowers, who actually started his career as a quarterback at Texas A&M, now is at New Mexico State as a tight end. He's really the only big-time name to know right now. I'm sure that will change very, very quickly over the next couple of days. But as of right now, Eli Stowers is kind of the guy to watch. I believe he's going on a visit to Vandy here pretty soon. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But this is a position that I expect to fill out a little bit more and at least get some bigger names in it as we go through this portal period. But let's finish off the offense with offensive line, and this one's kind of loaded, to be totally honest with you. You have Caden Proctor, who has officially entered the portal. He's coming from Iowa. He will be going to Bama, almost definitely. He was put in the portal with a no-contact tag, which essentially just means no one is allowed to make contact with him. He is only allowed to reach out to teams, which likely means he's reaching out to Bama and setting up pretty much when he can move in next. So it'll be interesting to see if anything goes awry there and some other teams find their way in. But for the time being, I think he's definitely finding his way back to Tuscaloosa. You also have Peyton Kirkland, a very, very talented kid from Texas that just was in a room that was just remarkably talented, although he seemed to be kind of making a push to be able to start possibly in 2025. So definitely a guy with high upside, and a lot of guys will be after him. Jansen Zandamela is another guy just like that. He was the top interior offensive lineman in this class, but has already entered the portal from USC, so it'll be really interesting to see if someone picks him up. There are plenty of people that need interior offensive line help across the country, so he'll have a big-time market. There's no two ways about that. You have Savion Washington from Colorado, who's someone to watch. I think he started most of the games last year for them. They also lost Isaiah Jada, the other tackle from Colorado that started most of the games. And it's kind of hard to conceptualize how big of a deal that is with how poor the offensive line was a year ago at Colorado. But at the end of the day, losing those guys as even rotational pieces is not necessarily ideal for Colorado. And definitely some teams will be after him because those are big dudes that can definitely play some good football. And two guys that are kind of big players in this. Andrew Chambly is a guy to definitely watch coming out of Arkansas. He set up visits to SMU, UCLA, Kansas State, and Colorado. So Colorado's already trying to replace some of those guys that have walked out the door. I believe he's still setting up visits for Virginia Tech and Maryland. So this will be a rather long process. He's one of the most highly coveted guys in this group. Obviously, Caden Proctor would be if he was actually up for grabs, but Andrew Chamblee is definitely a guy to watch. And then Marcus Bryant is a big-time player at offensive tackle. He has been crystal balled to Washington already, but was an absolute beast at SMU, and plenty of people will be after him. So until he signs that paper, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, because he definitely has huge upside, and a team like Alabama needs some help at offensive tackle for sure. So it'll be really interesting to see how those names develop, because there's a lot of really talented guys there that could jump in and start for you pretty much immediately. So I'll definitely be watching O-line very, very closely. D-line is another one that's kind of filled out a little bit faster than I think people thought. CJ West, in my opinion, is the best player of this group. He was a big-time player at Kent State a year ago, was an all-MAC selection, and just an absolute beast on the inside. He plays, A and B gap, so really that normal, defensive tackle type build is an absolute beast, and someone that plenty of teams will be after. We talked about how big of a deal defensive tackle is for these teams going into this year, and there'll be plenty going after CJ West, I'm sure. Jermaine Lowell, another guy from Louisville, is a really, really good pickup to have. Chaz Wallace from Colorado is another one. Bill Norton from Arizona is the one that it feels like things are starting to move in one direction, and that's in the direction of Austin, Texas. It feels like Bill Norton is kind of gearing up to commit to Texas. He is going to be on campus for their spring game this weekend, and we'll see what happens from there. But that's really the only team I've heard when talking about Bill Norton. So it'll be really interesting to see if he lands there. It would be a great fit for both of the parties. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next week with that one. But plenty of talent at this position already. I think it'll only get better. There's plenty of teams that need defensive tackles, which means there are plenty of guys across the country that right now might not be planning to go to the portal that will be getting calls that might convince them to go into the portal. But we'll figure that out, and we'll get to that as we kind of go on here. But let's move on to edge rushing, and this is kind of a fun group as well. Nigel Kelly is kind of the big fish here. He's the one that I think everyone is kind of going after, a 6'6" kind of beast that can do a ton of different things in the run game, in the pass game. Just was, behind Ruben Bain, who I think is going to be one of the best edge rushers in the entire country this upcoming year. And then you have a couple really, really talented kids right behind him. Billy Walton from Texas is someone to watch. Never quite got on the field at Texas, but a very talented kid coming out of high school that I think a lot of people will be after. Anthony Dunn Jr. from Florida A&M is another guy to watch. He was a huge player for them last year. Pretty much was an entire game wrecker that entire conference. So he's someone definitely to watch as more and more teams get involved. Dave Harris from Colorado also jumped in, another Colorado guy that has jumped in. And Dayon Haynes from Pitt is another one. Pitt feels like they've gotten hit a little bit here early on, as well as Colorado. Those are the two teams that I've noticed the most, I feel like, going through this. Also, Miami has lost a number of guys, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of rebuild those groups. But edge rushing especially, I think, will continue to build out, whether it's, outside linebackers or true edge rushers. I think there will be plenty of guys that can rush the passer on the market here pretty soon. Linebacker is two really, really solid guys. You have Solomon DeShields from Pitt, is someone that has been incredible for them the last couple of years, and definitely someone that will have a big-time market. And then Elijah Herring from Tennessee is probably the biggest name here. I mean, a leading tackler for Tennessee a year ago. Obviously, that defense is getting a ton better, but with someone like Elijah Herring walking out the door, not necessarily the ideal situation for the Vols, but this is one where there doesn't seem to be a ton of need across the country for linebackers, but at the end of the day, getting as much rotation at that position is really important, making sure guys' legs are fresh and everything. So there will be plenty of market for these guys. There will be plenty of teams knocking on their door, but at the end of the day, I don't know if there's any big-time starting positions open, at least unless these guys go in and steal it. With someone like Elijah Herring, it's definitely possible that he does that. But let's move on to the back end, and let's start with corner. The big name here is Cormani McClain. He was the top cornerback in the country in 2022, started his career at Colorado, started a couple of games, and had some off-field issues, in terms of maybe just not being as committed as Dion would have liked, just not quite fitting the program quite as nicely as I think everyone would have hoped. But at the end of the day, a very, very talented kid. Maybe a change of scenery will help him a lot, and I think everyone will be after this kid, to be totally honest, just because of the pure talent he has is just off the charts. But then you have Traquan Fagans from USC is a big-time name here. Cedric Hawkins, another guy from Ohio State that never quite found the field, but was stuck behind a ton of very talented kids, so he's obviously has some ability to him. And then Sam McCall's another one that never quite found the field, but is still very talented. We came out of high school very highly recruited, so plenty of guys will be after him as well. There will be plenty of people, especially at the corner position, I think, that will jump in throughout this process. I think there are plenty of big-time schools that need corners. Bama and Miami are the main two that come to mind, but plenty others. So it'll be interesting to see that fill out, especially just kind of this back end overall, although the safeties have gotten off to a pretty good start, to be totally honest with you. Jacoby Matthews is the big name here. He was part of that big-time 2021 A&M class. He has found a new place to play. Jaden Milliner-Jones is another guy to watch, as well as Miles Slusher. They both came from Colorado, so another two that have left Colorado over the last couple of days. But this is a really solid group right now. Jacoby Matthews is the guy. He's definitely someone that could be starting on most rosters across the country, so definitely the guy that I'm watching the closest here. But at the end of the day, Miles Slusher is very talented. Cedric Hawkins, I actually think, is a safety. I accidentally put him in the corner position, but plenty of talent at this position in the back end of this defense. So the teams that need to fill out that, the Miamis and the Bamas of the world, will have plenty to choose from, that's for sure. But as I talked about earlier, it feels like Colorado and Pitt, along with Miami, are teams that are getting hit the most, at least to start. I don't know how big of a deal the Colorado ones are, because some of those guys you don't necessarily need around, especially some of the offensive linemen. It's very possible that the guys that they brought in the winter portal had just beaten them out, and they are finding a new place to play. Pitt, it looks a little bit different. All of the guys that I've seen coming out of Pitt have, tons of stats behind them, have been starters for a couple of years, so a little bit more worrisome if you're Pittsburgh. They were in the middle of the storm of the NIL and transfer portal era when Jordan Addison made his way to USC, so maybe they're in the middle of it again. Who knows? But at the end of the day, I think hopefully all these teams can kind of find a level at some point and not have to worry about this all the way through. But definitely not the best start for those three teams for sure, but plenty of time to still build out this roster and make it a good portal era for them. But this is just the beginning. There will be plenty more to happen over the next couple of weeks, and we will keep you all updated as it comes. I think there's going to be some big-time names that come. I think the only one that's really shocked me thus far has been Cormani McLean, but I'm sure there will be plenty more to come that will shock me. But for the time being, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Deion Sanders and the teams that he, quote-unquote, will allow to draft Shedeur Sanders, Shiloh, and Travis Hunter. So we will take a slight break, and then we will be back right with that.